I never thought that a conversation about money could so quickly destroy what I thought was a solid relationship. When I met Tom 2 years ago, I thought I had finally met someone with whom I could build a calm, mature life. We met at a party with mutual friends. A normal, warm evening, glasses of wine, laughter, easy conversations. He knew how to listen. There was no false confidence in his voice that I always feared. In men, I wasn't looking for love. I had enough worries with a small son and work, but he showed up, and it was like he filled an empty space in my life. From the very beginning, he gave the impression of a person who was confident in his finances. Sometimes he joked that he was not in poverty, and I never got into the details. What was important to me was something else. How he communicated with my son, how he felt about my previous marriage, what values we shared. There were no problems with that. My son was drawn to him, and my ex-husband, surprisingly, even found a common language with him. I thought it was rare luck that everything worked out so harmoniously. But there was one detail I didn't mention, unless necessary. 3 years ago, before I met Tom, I won the lottery. Not the millions you read about in the papers, but enough that, with a reasonable approach, I would never have to worry about housing, my son's education, or even medical expenses for years to come. I put most of it, about 75%, into a savings account in my son's name. The money will be available when he turns 21. I invested the rest in more liquid things, leaving myself a safety net. I didn't see the point in advertising it, not out of greed. I just understood that in life there are people who see other people's money not as a child's future, but as an easy way to solve their own problems. When the conversation turned to marriage, I suggested a prenuptial agreement, not because I didn't trust Tom, but because it was a matter of principle for me to protect what belonged to my son. Tom took it calmly, or at least pretended to. But when the lawyer laid out the papers and sums on the table, his face changed. He read the lines silently, and I saw his expression change, from curiosity to bewilderment, and then to something cold. He didn't even listen to the end, stood up abruptly, and throwing out, "We need to talk," he left. For 2 days he didn't answer calls or messages. 2 long, viscous days, during which I managed to go over dozens of scenarios in my head. Maybe he was just digesting the information. Maybe he was offended that I didn't tell him about the win earlier. Maybe. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just resentment. This was something deeper and more dangerous. I remembered how he sometimes teased me for working too much for the sake of just a comfortable life, and how he casually hinted that we would have everything in common in the future. Then it sounded harmless, almost sweet. Now I heard something else in these words. On the 3rd day, I wrote a short message. "Tom, I don't think we should continue. You can return the ring when it's convenient." There was no answer, but exactly a week later, he was standing at my door. He looked strange. On the one hand, as if he was glad to see me. On the other, he was hunched over, tense, like a spring. We sat down in the kitchen, and he started asking where the money came from. I told him honestly about the lottery. He listened, and suddenly, almost without a pause, said that he had a 5-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, and that since this money was just luck and not earnings, it would be fair to split it so that his daughter would also get a share. I sat there looking at him, trying to catch a hint of humor in his voice. But he was serious, even irritated. "It's not your earned money," he said, squinting slightly. "You just happen to be in the right place at the right time. Why not do the right thing? Why does your son deserve everything, and my daughter deserves nothing?" These words sounded as if we were discussing the division of an inheritance between distant relatives and not the future of my child. I didn't know he had a daughter. For 2 years, he never mentioned her. No photos, no stories, no calls. And now, a demand to divide what I saved for my son. I took off the ring and put it in front of him. "Tom, this is not a bargaining chip. Go away." He looked at the ring, then at me. A second later, he stood up, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just left. And then it began. The first message came at night, at 2:13, when I woke up from the quiet beep of my phone and checked as usual. Suddenly the kindergarten wrote something. Suddenly the parents. The avatar is a neutral landscape. The nickname is strange. Justice for all. The text is short, angry, offended. "How can you take away the future of a 5-year-old girl? Everyone already knows your name. Shame." I did not answer and blocked 20 minutes later. Another profile, this time with a woman's name and hearts in the bio. Money fell on your head. Share it. Don't be a monster. Block. In the morning, I was greeted by dozens of notifications on different platforms and messengers. Everywhere, the same thought, the same accusatory intonation, as if a box of chocolates was stolen from me. And not from me. They are trying to pull out the support that I built for my own child. My son, as always, got up early. He stomped barefoot into the kitchen, hugged me from behind, pressed his forehead to my back, and I felt that simple, clear weight of his little hands. At such moments, it seems that the world narrows to our breathing and the quiet puffing of the coffee machine. I made him cocoa, myself a strong black coffee, and for the first time in a long time I caught his gaze. Wary, attentive. Children always sense. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, trying to look at the phone screen. "It's okay," I said, and turned off the sound. "It's just that adults write stupid things." I took him to kindergarten, lingered for a couple of minutes at the door, watched him put on his chain shoes, and concentrated on struggling with the Velcro, watched the teacher smile and pat him on the shoulder. Returning home, I caught myself looking back, as if expecting to see a familiar car. In the rearview mirror, the empty street was more uncomfortable than with someone's shadow. At home, I opened my laptop and went back to the beginning, to the day at the law office. I remembered how Tom sat across from me, one leg crossed over the other, and how something clicked in his eyes the moment the lawyer named the total amount in his son's account. Neither envy nor greed, that came later. At first, there was wounded disbelief. He was not the master of the situation. His confidence cracked when someone else's, but more stable tomorrow appeared nearby. And yet, a daughter. If she exists, why have I never heard of her? Tom daughter, I typed into the search in my chats. 0 results. I scrolled through photos for 2 years. Trips, birthdays, New Year. He and my son are making a snowman. He is fixing the faucet with my father. He's making pasta in my kitchen. Nowhere. Not a hint of another world, a parallel life where there is a 5-year-old who would be the center for him. I felt cold from this emptiness. The messages didn't stop. Several of them had the same phrase. The children are not to blame. The punctuation, the strange placement of dashes, the periods with spaces, somehow too similar for different random people. I started taking screenshots and putting them in a folder. When someone wrote especially aggressively, I checked if the profile was subscribed to Tom. Often. Yes, even more often. Created yesterday. I called a lawyer. He listened in silence, and only at the end said, "A marriage contract is about boundaries. You have outlined them. Any attempts to put pressure on someone using third parties, record them. We can file a complaint if there is a transition to direct threats. And if you want, I can recommend a psychologist. Not because you can't cope, but because it is good to have a place where you can relieve tension without fear of condemnation." I thanked him and hung up, feeling how these calm words straightened something compressed inside me. In the evening, my ex-husband wrote to me. He rarely gets involved in my personal stories, but here apparently he sensed, "I saw some strange comments on your page. Is everything okay? I'll sort it out," I answered. "Thank you for asking. I'll stop by if necessary. And yes, be careful in the garden." I smiled. He could irritate me with his pragmatism, but right now his caution seemed right. At 9 o'clock in the evening, a new message. This time without accusations, simply, "I'm Marina. I need to talk to you about Tom. The avatar is empty. The account was created a year ago, but there are almost no likes or subscriptions." Inside, silence. "About what exactly?" I typed. "About his daughter." I saw these quotes and felt my heart make 2 quick beats in a row. Who are you? To him. Once, no one. Now, the one he also tried to use. If you are ready to listen, tomorrow at 12, Brusnica, Cafe. Sit by the window, I'll find out. And yes, come alone, come alone. A well-worn cliché from cheap detectives. Sounded unexpectedly alarming. I closed the chat and waited to see if the fear would return from where it had been hiding all day. It returned, but along with it, something else arose. Curiosity, stubbornness, a desire to put an end to the omission. I wrote to Marina, "Okay," took a screenshot of the correspondence and forwarded it to my friend with a note. "If I don't get in touch an hour after the meeting tomorrow, call me." I barely slept that night. I thought about boundaries and how strangely people understand fairness. Is it fair to take away one child to give to another? Is it fair to turn someone else's life inside out because happiness fell upon them without their due? I remembered Tom. How he laughed, how he knew when I needed a break, how caring he was with my son, and how it turns out he knew how not to talk about what should be the axis of the world for a father. I turned these opposites over like stones, each with its own insects scurrying under them. In the morning, everything was as usual. Breakfast, tie shoelaces, checked backpack, kiss on the top of the head. I caught the teacher's gaze, attentive, understanding. Perhaps she also saw yesterday's comments, or she simply felt my composure, like a string. If you need anything, say so, she said quietly. Thank you. Everything is under control, I answered, and for the first time in 2 days, I said this not only for others, but also for myself. Brusnica smelled of fresh pastries and cinnamon. The window overlooked a small street with elm trees. The wind drove yellow leaves along the asphalt, as if the calendar had suddenly jumped a month. I arrived a little earlier, and specially chose a table so that I could see the entrance and the reflection of the door in the glass of the shop window. On days like these, it seems like you've grown extra eyes. At 12:07, a woman came in, 30-something, dark hair, pulled back into a high ponytail, direct gaze. She was wearing a grey sweater and a coat with lapels that had lost their newness, the clothes of a practical person who is not in the mood for playing at impressions. She looked around, noticed me, and came over. Marina, she said, holding out her hand. I remember, I replied. Sit down. We ordered tea, and only when the waitress had left, Marina put an envelope on the table. There were printouts there, correspondence with Tamina's number, copies of applications, some screenshots of bank notifications. She didn't push them towards me, but simply put them in the middle, like someone putting someone else's things on the table, not wanting to appropriate them. He will write to you from new accounts, she said calmly. These are not his friends. It is himself. Sometimes it is his sister. They have the same turns of phrase, stress, mistakes. He thinks that if you hit harder, and more often, the walls will collapse. Why did you interfere? Marina smiled at the corner of her mouth. Because I was his story a year ago. He started with justice, ended with an attempt to sign me up for a mutually beneficial loan. I retreated in time. Not everyone has time. A daughter? I asked. My voice suddenly wavered and I straightened up, irritated with myself. Does she exist? Marina looked straight at me, not sternly, not with pity, but in the way they look when they have already broken these words against their own mouth. Tom doesn't have a daughter, she said evenly. Never had one. Before she could add another word, my phone, lying face down, vibrated so sharply, as if someone had pulled the cord out of the socket. A notification popped up on the locked screen. Attempt to log into your bank account. If it's not you, confirm. Time seemed to shrink into a tight, sticky lump for a second. I looked at the notification, trying to figure out if it was an accident, a glitch, or if someone's fingers were right now hitting the keys, trying to figure out my password. I can only log into my bank from 2 devices, my phone and my laptop at home. I looked up at Marina, and she was already looking at me as if she knew exactly what I saw. He's fast, she said quietly, as if we were sitting in a courtroom, where every word could become evidence. When he realizes that words don't work, he moves on to action. I opened the notification and immediately clicked. It wasn't me. My fingers were shaking, although I tried to keep my voice even. You mean he's, a hacker? Marina shrugged. I don't think he's that skilled. Most likely he's trying to guess passwords or has gained access to some old device where your data is stored. He's acting in a pushy manner. I had the same thing. Logins to email, social networks, then to online banking. The waitress brought the tea and we fell silent while she set the cups down. The smell of bergamot seemed oddly out of place. He doesn't have a daughter, Marina repeated when the waitress left. This is his favorite tactic, to invent a third party for whom you will feel obligated. I had a sick father. Another woman had an alcoholic brother who needs treatment. The stories are different, but the essence is the same, to provoke guilt and reveal your resources. I remembered every moment over the past 2 years when Tom talked about family, about his parents, almost nothing about relatives, vaguely, as if they were somewhere far away, and there was no point in calling them. I never saw him with any of them, not a single visit on holidays. And now, when the puzzle began to come together, there were too many black holes in it. Why did you decide to warn me? I asked. You could have just blocked and forgotten. Marina looked down at her cup, then looked again, straight ahead, without blinking. Because you have a child. You locked up the money in his name. He doesn't like it even more than I did when I simply refused the deal. He has a habit of hitting where it hurts, and I don't want him to get to your point of no return. I felt a chill in the pit of my stomach, not from fear, but from the realization that the game had been going on longer than I thought, and that perhaps, for the last 2 weeks, I had been living in a set where he had assigned all the roles in advance. We also talked about how he could collect information, about how it would be better to change all passwords and enable two-factor protection. Marina told me that he often creates entire networks of fake accounts to create the illusion of pressure from all sides. When we paid and left, the air outside was prickly, and I wanted to inhale it so deeply that I could wash away the smell of this conversation. "Take care of yourself," Marina said, before walking away, in the opposite direction. I walked home, although I usually took a taxi. It took me a while to collect my thoughts. At home, the first thing I did was check the locks. Then I sat down at my laptop and started changing passwords. All the ones I could remember: bank, email, social networks, work accounts. Some of them already had warnings about login attempts. In the evening, when I was picking up my son from kindergarten, I noticed a car in the parking lot that I had seen earlier at Tom's. It was parked a little further away, and I might not have noticed if it hadn't been for the look. The same one that you feel with your skin. Someone was sitting in the car, but the glass was tinted. I pretended not to notice and quickly took my son away, chatting with him about how we were going to have dinner. But inside, everything was on edge. At home, while he was playing with his construction set, I picked up the phone again. 5 new messages from different numbers. One was a voice message, a strange female voice, cold and abrupt, saying that people like me should think about more than just their child. I caught myself listening, not to the words, but to the pauses, the breathing between phrases. And I realized this wasn't just someone he knew, it was him. He changed his intonation, his rhythm, but he was recognizable. I sat in the semi-darkness of the kitchen, listening to the quiet sounds from my son's room, and understood that this was not the peak yet, that he would look for new ways, and that I needed to be one step ahead. What I didn't know was that his next step would be much closer to my door than I could have imagined. The first sign was neither a text nor a call. It was a quiet, barely audible sound under the door when my son and I were about to go to bed. A scraping sound, as if something was sliding across the floor, and then a short thud. I went up to it, looked through the peephole. No one. But on the rug lay an envelope, unsigned, unaddressed, inside, a childhood photograph, not of my son. A girl of about 5, in a pink dress, with a wide, stretched smile on her mouth, and on the back, in someone else's harsh handwriting, "She deserves the same as your son." I sat with this photo in the kitchen, feeling the cold creeping from my fingers to my shoulders. Who is this? Just a random picture from the internet, or someone's real photo? And most importantly, why? To prove that the daughter exists? Or to scare? The phone rang at 10:17 p.m. Unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but I pressed the green button. "Have you seen her?" The voice was muffled, but I recognized the timbre. "Tom, she's a child just like yours. You're not a monster, are you?" "Tom," I said his name slowly. "One more message like that, and I'm going to the police." He chuckled. "The police? Do you think they'll care about a few photos?" "No, honey. We have everything in common if we're a family, and we're almost a family. We've never been one." I answered and hung up. I closed all the windows, checked the locks, and turned on the nightlight in the hallway. That night, my sleep was ragged, with awakenings from any rustle. I caught myself listening to the elevator, to the footsteps outside the door, to the noise in the entrance. The next morning, I went to the police. The officer on duty listened to me without much enthusiasm, but when I showed him the envelope, the photo, and the list of messages, his face became more serious. We filed a report, and he warned me, "Record everything that comes. This will be necessary if the case goes to court." At home, I installed cameras, one in the hallway in front of the door, the second in the apartment in case someone tries to enter. I told my son that these were new guards, and he was even glad that now we have almost like in the movies. It was quiet for 2 days. I almost began to believe that he had backed off. But on the evening of the 3rd day, the camera recorded how someone left a small box at the door. When I opened it, inside was a children's toy, a car, almost exactly like the one my son played with in kindergarten, and a note, "Children should share." This was the turning point. I realized that he was not just putting pressure on me psychologically. He had crossed the line, approaching our personal space, my child. I sent the recording to the police, and this time they responded faster. They promised to increase patrols near the house and check who owned the car that I saw near the kindergarten. The next day, my ex-husband called me. His voice was harsh, without unnecessary emotions. I know what's going on. If he comes near the garden again, I'll sort it out myself. No, I won't, I said. Everything will go through the police. If it's through the police, then through the police. But know this, he won't come close. That evening, I received a notification from the camera. Movement at the door. I turned on the broadcast and saw Tom standing there holding the very ring that I had returned to him. He carefully placed it on the rug and left no notes, no words. Just this silent gesture. I looked at the screen and understood. This is the end. Not because he gave in, but because I will no longer give him a chance or entry into my life. I took the ring, put it in a box, and sent it to the lawyer, along with copies of all the materials. Let it become evidence if necessary. A week passed. There were no more messages. The cameras showed only neighbors and couriers. My son lived his usual childhood life, and only sometimes I caught myself holding his hand a little tighter when I was taking him to kindergarten. One evening, while putting him to bed, he suddenly asked, "Mom, why do you always look at who's behind the door?" I smiled and stroked his hair. Because I want to be sure that there are only good people behind the door. And at that moment, I realized that no matter how scary it was, I made the right choice. I saved what was important. I protected my child. And that is the only justice that matters to me.